Hello everyone, Vinny here. This time I'm here to talk about Bravely Default, its history, importance, the ups and downs of the franchise and where to start if you want to get into the series. First of all, to better understand what is the Bravely Default series, we have to go back in time a little, back to the Nintendo DS era. Back then, Square Enix started releasing 3D remakes of the older Final Fantasy games, starting with Final Fantasy III, which was also the first time the game saw a release in the West, officially at least. The lead producer in these remakes was this guy called Asano Tomoya, save that name for later, and after some success from the Final Fantasy III remake, the team went on and worked on the 3D remake for Final Fantasy IV. I won't get much into these two games here, but it's important to know these remakes existed, because after them, instead of remaking Final Fantasy V as one would expect, Asano and his team received the green light to create something new. A new original title with more creative freedom, and thus the first Bravely Default was born, right? No, but almost. This new original game was a spin-off called Final Fantasy IV Heroes of Light. This game is essentially a draft for what would become the Bravely Default series. Some people online even go as far as calling it Bravely Default Zero or beta version, and that's why I'll talk more about this game than the remakes. 4 Heroes of Light plays a lot like an old school Final Fantasy game. The premise of 4 Warriors of Light fighting against evil and saving the world, a world map to explore, towns to visit, a job system akin to Final Fantasy III and V, but with a new turn-based combat, which is a very primitive version of what would become the Brave and Default battle system. The battles here are played in a classic turn-based manner. You choose your actions at the beginning of each turn and then watch as the battle unfolds. The twist is that your characters can accumulate up to 5 AP, or action points, and every action possible has an AP cost, even the basic attack. At the beginning of each turn your characters gain 1 AP, but you have this boost ability on every character, which make the character defend themselves on that turn and gain 1 extra AP to use later. If you already played any Bravely Default game, I'm sure that reminds you of something. If you haven't, I'll get there soon. I do enjoy this battle system as there is a lot of risk and reward to it, and in general I feel that 4 Heroes of Light is a good game and presents a lot of good ideas. However, many of them fall flat throughout the game as its flaws start to show up. For me, one of the most annoying of these flaws is actually more of a narrative choice that impacts on the gameplay so much that it gets in the way of what could be a great game, which is, for the most part of the game, the part gets separated. Even though the game is called 4 Heroes of Light, you're mostly always playing with 1 or 2 of them and some random quest in your party. That by itself wouldn't be a real problem. We've seen other games do similar things, separating characters, and it worked, but here it feels like not having the 4 heroes together gets in the way of the crown system, which is this game job system. Since you're always switching back and forth between single characters and duos and having to basically repeat builds on each duo to survive or adapt to the random quest of the time instead of having freedom to experiment with 4 different jobs in battle and exploring all the possibilities it could bring. It's not until much later in the game that you're finally able to fully take advantage of this system. Also, another problem is the auto-target system. Gosh, I hate this so much, I get mad even by thinking about it. The game never lets you choose who are you attacking or healing during the battles, and you can imagine how frustrating this can be sometimes. The OST is also a little underwhelming, and the art style, well, it's cute, but sometimes it makes things a little hard to find in town since this game has these vibrant colors and this strange scrolling effect. Or maybe I'm just getting old, I don't know. A lot of elements from the Final Fantasy series are missing too, making this game look like it's more on its way to become something new than just being a spin-off from a very popular series. There's also this level scaling system that can be a hassle near the end of the game. I've never been really a fan of level scaling in JRPGs, but it seemed even worse here, to the point that I felt punished for grinding and the final bosses became harder and harder the more I leveled up. To counter this, you have to upgrade your equipment, which can take dozens of hours of farming specific drops. But anyway, the good ideas present in this game wouldn't really go to waste, because after releasing this Final Fantasy spin-off, Asano and his team would go on to create something like a sequel to it, but this time with much more personality, and that would be, finally, the first Bravely Default. Bravely Default is often considered the first game from what is now called Team Asano, the team led by Asano Tomoya, and responsible for other hits like Octopath Traveler, Triangle Strategy, and the creation of the HD 2D graphic style, which would later be used for remakes like Live Alive, Star Ocean 2nd, and most recently Dragon Quest III. This game had my attention as soon as it was announced. If you were a JRPG fan back in that time, you might remember how traditional turn-based RPGs were losing space, especially after having such an amazing JRPG library on the PS2. But Bravely Default appeared promising to be everything I wished for, and it really was. All of those issues from 4 Heroes of Light were fixed. The art style, well, now we have beautiful towns that mix 3D and 2D. The character models are now full of personality and much more accurate to their artworks, which by the way were made by Yoshida Kihiko, famous for working on games like Final Fantasy Tactics and Final Fantasy XII. He was also the lead artist from Final Fantasy III Remake and 4 Heroes of Light, and I might say that this guy is probably my favorite Square Enix character designer. Being released for the 3DS instead of the original DS also helped a lot in this. And remember how the 4 Heroes of Light soundtrack was unamusing? Well, now we got Revo, the same guy responsible for those awesome Attack on Titan songs, taking care of the soundtrack. And boy, what a freaking good OST. I've read somewhere that he intended to create songs that reminded people of classic OSTs like Dragon Quest and the Saga series. Personally, I think he did something very different from that, but in a good way. He created a soundtrack that became pretty much of a big part of the game's identity. Now for my favorite parts of Bravely Default, plot and gameplay, the heart of this game. Since the beginning, Bravely Default appeared as a successor to the classic Final Fantasy game, in a time when the main Final Fantasy series was struggling to find its own identity. Well, actually that's still happening a decade later, but anyway, this game evolved so well from a Final Fantasy spin-off that it became its own thing. Sure, the original references to Final Fantasy are all there. 4 Warriors of Light and a Journey, classic jobs like Black Mage, White Mage and Summoner, the spells like Blizzard, Blizzara and Blizzaga, the world map to explore, elemental crystals. In the end, it never tries to deny its origins, and its promise to bring back the classic Final Fantasy feeling, but all in a new experience full of personality. Lots of ideas from the 4 Heroes of Light are back. If you play both games, you will notice that many enemy designs are the same, some bosses will become recurring, and even the mysterious adventurer and his fox companion that acts as the save point will return in the Bravely series. The first act of the game acts pretty much like you would expect from a classic JRPG. You go from town to town, get to meet people there, help them with their needs, usually by going through dungeons while at the same time pursuing the main character's main objective. However, even for something that plays so classic as this, the amount of quality of life implemented and even experimented on this game makes it feel like a breath of fresh air. This was probably one of the first games, if not the first. Well, as far as I know, at least it's the first JRPG to give you full control of the encounter rate. You can choose to lower or increase the frequency of enemy encounters in 50 or 100%. Of course, the game warns you that if you completely remove enemy encounters, you will probably become underlevel and suffer the consequences. On the other hand, if you just wanna grind some levels, or most probably job levels, you can find yourself a place with good enemies and increase your encounter rate. As if this wasn't enough, you even get XP bonuses for finishing the battle in one turn or taking no damage. This is all part of what makes grinding and battling in this game not a pain in the ass, but this is not the only reason for that. Which brings us to the best part of it all, the battle system. Remember on 4 Heroes of Light when I said that you could use the boost option to defend and accumulate up to 5 action points and then spend them on stronger actions or skills? That system became the Brave and Default system, which is where this game shines even brighter. You can accumulate or spend turns all at once in this system. The default action works basically as a defend action, but every time you do it, you accumulate 1 extra turn to spend later, and you can accumulate up to 3 of these turns. By the way, they are called BP now, which stands for Brave Points. On the other hand, when you choose the Brave action, you will be able to spend these turns, or BP, and perform up to 3 actions at once, using any spare BPs you accumulated, or spending more than you have and getting in debt, meaning that the character will be with negative BP, and the character with negative BP will be unable to act for the next turns until he or she recovers all the spent BP. This makes for a very dynamic battle system with a very high risk and reward system. Is it a good idea to go all in and spend all your BP attacking the enemy? Should you save some BP with your healer and then spend it all at once to make sure everyone comes out alive? There's a huge plethora of possibilities with this battle system combined with the job system. I've seen people complaining that near the end game only a few job combinations work, but I don't know, I don't think that's true. At least everything I tried worked as long as I did a few tweaks in my strategies. Now, for the second act of Bravely Default there are some huge surprises that I won't spoil here, but be ready for plot twists and some wacky stuff happening. If you already played the game, yes, I know, I will address the enormous elephant in the room. This game gets repetitive near the end, like really repetitive. And while I don't think I can make any excuses for that in the gameplay department, I really think it makes up for it with its story. Seriously, try not to be intimidated by the repetition. Another very creative point is how this game interacts with other systems and players, adding a lot of metagame elements into the experience. You get to rebuild the town that's destroyed in the opening scene, and for that, you gotta recruit other players' help through the 3DS Street Pass feature, or through your friend list. Well, at least you could in the past, when the system was still alive and there were people actually playing it and carrying their 3DS around. Nonetheless, it was really fun while it lasted. Well, to sum it all up, I'll say everything again, like everything you would wish for on a classic Final Fantasy game, including world maps, job system, elemental crystals, amazing soundtracks, beautiful graphics, fun and creative battle system, a surprising story with awesome plot twists and charismatic heroes of light, add in some new features like optional interaction with other players and lots of quality of life, and boom, you have a mandatory JRPG on the 3DS, which, by all means, you shouldn't sleep on. The most important thing about Bravely Default and the time when it was released is that it served as a proof that turn-based classic JRPGs still had some space. There were lots of fans craving for new experiences in the genre, while everything else was becoming action games or simply ceasing to exist like a lot of other franchises. Apart from some indie games and some lesser-known niche companies, Bravely Default was one of the few who dared to be such a default game, and in a very bravely fashion, and most likely helped to pave the way for future JRPGs titles and their glorious return to home consoles a few years later. And even today, the only reason I don't consider Bravely Default to be the best JRPG on the 3DS is because the absolute masterpiece called Radiant Historia got a re-release known as Perfect Chronology for that system, and you should play it too, by the way. Now, being such a great game and with such a great reception, it was only a matter of time till Team Asano appeared announcing a sequel. A few years later, it was time for the world to know Bravely Default 2? No, not yet. The sequel was actually called Bravely Second. This game also took place in Luxembourg, the same world as the previous game, but 2 years after the end of Bravely Default's story. A lot of returning characters and places also show up in this game. Now, unfortunately, this game wasn't really favored by the time of its release like Bravely Default was. The end of the 3DS life cycle and a lot of other minor problems made the release of Bravely Second be seen as quite a disappointment. But don't get me wrong, I had a lot of fun with Bravely Second, and overall I think it's a very underestimated game, but there's a few issues that I just can't pretend they don't exist. First of all, one of the main complaints about this game is that it's just too similar to the first one, reusing models, assets and songs, making it look more like a DLC than a new game. While I do understand the reasons for these complaints, I also don't think of this as a real problem. Like, a lot of direct sequels does this, and usually it doesn't bother me. The second usual complaint about Bravely Second is that the soundtrack isn't as good as the first one, saying that this time Rival wasn't responsible for it. And, well, this is partially true. The new original songs aren't bad, but they're just not as good as the previous game. But it's still a very good OST, don't get me wrong. I don't really think this is enough reason to hate on this game at all. Now, the writing on this game. This is where I really think the game fails to live up to its predecessor. Humor was something present on Bravely Default, but Bravely Second just takes it to another level, and on a bad way. Most of the time it's just too goofy. Good characters with serious plot from the previous game just suffered from a terrible flanderization that they seem to become joke versions of themselves. This goes for both villains and the main characters. Seriously, I dare you to sit through every idea conversation about food. I double dare you. By the end of the game, I just couldn't bear it anymore. Every time she started talking about food, I just skimmed through all the text, and believe me, I hate doing that on a JRPG. Also, on this game you gotta face new villains called Balls and the Glens Empire. Yes, Balls and Glens. And your party even gets to be called the Ball Busters. I swear to you guys, I'm not making that up. This is exactly how things are called in this game. As if it wasn't enough, the story is kind of all over the place with some very predictable twists and pacing problems, especially when it comes to the side quests. There are some good side quests in the game, don't get me wrong, but their timing is just... I don't know, they totally take the focus from the main story more frequently than it should. There's also the problem of way too many things trying to be part of the same story here. There's an evil empire, balls from the moon itself, some sci-fi like stuff that may get into spoiler territory. There are just so many things that everything becomes too shallow. The first game had a very successful plot twist, and it's pretty hard trying to live up to that expectation on a sequel. Just a few games managed to get it right. And this time I think the main twist kind of falls flat, not because it's terrible, but it's just so crazy and taking the metagaming experience to such a level that it kind of breaks the immersion when trying to be too immersive. Not only it breaks the immersion, but depending on some external factors like your system language, it may even break your game during the last boss. I'm not even kidding. It's not uncommon for the game to freeze during the battle because of all of this stuff. It's very innovative to say the least. You can't really blame a game for being too creative, right? Well, I did enjoy some aspects of it, but I can totally understand why some people hate it. It just goes too overboard. But putting all these problems aside, the battle system and the job system are still here, with a few tweaks that makes them even more enjoyable, and at least for me, that's the main point of everything, a fun gameplay, right? There are new grinding bonuses and new jobs to be unlocked, tons of new possible strategies with them, all of which made me enjoy this game even more than I thought I would, considering some bad reviews I had read before I started playing it. In the end, Bravely Second does not really live up to the expectations as a sequel to Bravely Default, but it's a fun game if you're able to not take it too seriously. And it's still a lot more enjoyable than 4 Heroes of Light, that's for sure. The colder reception compared to the first Bravely Default made the series lie dormant for a while, until... Bravely Default 2. 2021, 6 years later, we finally saw the release of a new Bravely game. And properly numbered this time. Instead of a 3DS exclusive, this one was released for Nintendo Switch and PC. This one's not a direct sequel to Bravely Default nor Bravely Second. Between the release of these games, Team Asano released a lot of other successful projects, from original titles like Octopath Traveler to remakes like Live Alive, and then finally back to their prodigal son. Even with the ongoing success of their HD 2D titles, Bravely Default maintains, or at least tries to, maintain the original 3D super deformed models, just like the previous games in the series. However, right off the bat on the game cover and in the first cutscene we can see that the art style is a little different this time. And the reason for that is, Yoshida Akihiko is not the lead character designer or artist this time. Instead, we have Ikushima Naoki, the same guy from the Octopath series. Personally, I liked Yoshida's art better, and the new 3D models really didn't appeal to me. There are just too many details on them. It's a little bit uncanny, I guess, but then again, that's pretty subjective. I won't lie to you, this game took a while to grow on me. Way longer than its predecessors. I had to insist and persist a little bit on it, but in the end it was worth it. Bravely Default 2 distances itself a little bit from its original elements. Some classic jobs like Summoner were ditched for new ones, the adventurer and his pet fox aren't there anymore. Some recurring enemies from the franchise also aren't featured here. The entire world from Bravely Default 2 is different. We're not in Luxembourg anymore and there are no returning characters. From a world building point of view, all we have are some returning elements that used to build the series universe, like fairies and the asterisks. Pretty much like numbered Final Fantasy games usually do, introducing new worlds and characters while sharing some mythology with each other. This game also takes a much more serious tone than the other games. No more excessive puns, most of the time the characters are very focused on their journey, and even though there are light-hearted moments, they are not as frequent as they used to be. That can also be either good or bad. Personally, as I said earlier, Bravely Second kinda exaggerated on the comic relief moments to the point it became annoying for me, so all this seriousness was a welcome change of pace. Once again, the soundtrack is made by Revel, and just like the first Bravely Default, it's incredible. This time it's even more obvious that he's the same guy from the Attack on Titan songs. For example, the battle theme. You can almost hear someone singing Sasageyo in the background. This is like the perfect mix of Final Fantasy with Attack on Titan. There's not a single bad track in this game, the man really did surpass himself. Now, as I said, the game took a while to grow on me, and the reason for that is that the battle system and the job system both received a few tweaks here and there. The base for the battle system is still the same, and the Brave and Default system still works essentially the same way as before. What's different here is how the order of the character actions are decided. Instead of choosing the actions for everyone and then watching the turns roll out, we have a pseudo ATB system a little similar to how the turn order was decided on Final Fantasy IV to Final Fantasy IX. There's a gauge for each character that gets filled a little more with each action, and when it's full the character can act. The same goes for the enemies, and it's possible to use skills to delay the enemy's actions. That's a good change actually. After getting used to it and getting skills to manipulate it, I started to enjoy this new updated battle system way more than the previous games. Now for the job system. It's still called asterisks here. During the first hours and probably the first 2 chapters in the game, I couldn't really get into it. No matter how much I leveled and combined the jobs, I always felt that for the boss fights I'd have to go back to the classic formation of 2 physical characters, a black mage and a white mage. Other than that, everything just seemed so brutally hard it started to get frustrating. However, once you start to find new asterisks and you are able to experiment combining passive skills, secondary jobs and trying out different formations, the job system really starts to shine. Before I knew it, what was frustrating to me suddenly starting to feel more and more compelling, and I even felt like I wanted to grind job levels just to try new combinations. So, long story short, if you play this game and find it a little frustrating and hard, give it a chance, I swear to you it gets better. Now, from everything I said, it seems that this game may be the perfect sequel Bravely Default always deserved, right? Unfortunately, this game also has a lot of unexcusable flaws. Starting more superficially, the graphics could be a lot better. It's not only a matter of art style, but a lot of time it seems that the 3DS games were a lot more beautiful than this is, even being on the Nintendo Switch and PC. I know that Switch is not a powerful hardware, but there are lots of games, including JRPGs, that look way better than this. And getting a little deeper into one of the things that really bothered me the most, the side quests. In the first games, basically all of the side quests had their own sub-stories, with voice actings, dungeons and good rewards. Usually a new asterisk, not to mention it added depth to the lore. Now, most of them here are just fetch quests that barely give you any useful rewards and don't add anything at all to the game other than making you waste your time going back and forth. Not to mention the fact that there are 100 of them. And there's no quest list at all for you to check which ones you completed and which ones you're still missing. And that, for a completionist, can be infuriating. It gets even weirder when you notice the quests even have numbers, so they went through the trouble of numbering every side quest in the game and then not putting them in order, meaning that you'll find, for example, quest number 12 and then quest number 5. But you'll never know if you missed number 13 and 14 or if they just didn't show up yet. Halfway through the game, a few actually interesting side quests start to appear. and you usually know which ones will be important because they always start with voiced cutscenes. Still, more than a half of this 100 side quest feels like nothing more than a huge filler. Other things that were a letdown for me in this game include some missing mechanics that I enjoyed. I think I didn't mention them when I was talking about Bravely Default and Bravely Second, but you could customize each character's special attacks, and now you can't anymore. Each asterisk has its own predetermined special attack, and that's it, you can't change or customize anything. The encounter rate slider is also missing, meaning that you can't control anymore how many enemies you want to find on your way. The idle gaming mechanics were also simplified. In the previous games we had the city building through the 3DS Street Pass and the Bravely Second mechanic, where you could get an extra turn in a fight for every 8 hours with the game on or on sleep mode. All of this is gone. In its place, there's a boring ship exploring that simply rewards you with a few items every time you talk to the old lady in town after accumulating some hours of playtime or leaving the Switch in rest mode. Remember how fun I said it was to grind using consecutive battles and adding risk and reward to each fight? Well, that's gone too. Actually, not totally gone, but also simplified, and the rewards now aren't really that great. And since you can't control the encounter rate anymore, you will depend on items to get consecutive battles, and that's kind of a hassle to do before the endgame. And last but not least, the famous plot twists and metagame elements that help define the series are also a little bit simplified here. Although in this case it can be a good thing, considering how over the top Bravely Second was. I won't get into details about Spart, so I won't spoil you. However, even with all these issues, just like Bravely Second, this game still carries one of the best battle and job systems you can find in JRPGs, so the positive side can easily outweigh the negative. Near the end game there's a lot of good content and challenges to be found, and a lot of fun to be had. The story and world building also gets better with each passing chapter, and overall the story is way more focused, a well needed step back from the Bravely Second failed attempt at a complex plot. As you have seen, there were lots of ups and downs throughout the games in this series, but to try and sum it all up, this series has one of my favorite battle systems ever, and every turn-based RPG fan should at least give it a chance. You can start with the first Bravely Default, which in my opinion is still the best in the series, or you can start with Bravely Default 2 since it has a brand new independent story and universe, and is also a very good game. Just do not start with Bravely Second since it's a direct sequel, and keep your distance from 4 Heroes of Light, unless you already played all of the 3 Bravely games and feel like you still want a little more of that. This series seems to be a bit overshadowed by the success of Asano Team other games like Octopath Traveler and Triangle Strategy, and the fact that the first games are stuck on the 3DS surely doesn't help. But hadn't they released the first Bravely Default back then, there would probably be none of this, no Octopath and no HD 2D remakes. In this video I tried to cover the main games in the series, but there's also other titles like a mobile gacha called Bravely Default Fairy's Effect, and there was even a browser game. However, they're not available for playing anymore, and I didn't really have the chance to play them while they were still online, so I can't really give my opinion on them. Either way, I'm willing to bet that they were nothing more than just cash grab service games anyway. But if you're really curious about them, there are some videos around talking about them and showing how they were. I'll leave some links on the description. At least for the gacha game, I have no idea where to find anything about the browser game. And to be honest, I kinda don't care about a browser game anyway, but to each their own, right? So, I hope I helped you understand a little bit more about Bravely Default now, and if you haven't played it yet, I hope I have convinced you to give it a chance. Every now and then, or whenever I feel like it, and that can be in a couple of weeks or maybe in a couple of years, I'll make a video like this about other franchises I like, so till next time!